So in my last video, I talked about the inclusion of Mother of Runes and how if we get board wiped after Hofri is removed, the board wipe is especially effective against us because we get board wiped just like everyone else, and we have to rebuild pretty slowly. Now that doesn't mean we can't. We have a lot of creature recursion, and so we actually can rebuild pretty quickly. But our best case scenario is to make it so that the board wipes that people typically include in their decks are not effective against us. However, if they have spot removal in hand, then if they can get rid of Hofri, then the board wipe just becomes especially good. And so for that reason, I put in the Mother Runes, and that so far has been a killer decision. Uh, I also talked about in my previous video of considering putting in Giver of Runes, but I found so far that that's not necessary. So the Mother of Runes is something, technically Giver of Runes is also tutorable off of the Imperial Recruiter and the Recruiter of the Guard. And uh, that has been enough in most cases for me to find the Mother Runes when I feel like I need a protection effect. Now, most people, um, they they don't really have a way to beat two Mother of Runes, and that's something that is uh, easily done in this deck because with the sack outlet, we can protect something with Mother Runes and then sacrifice the Mother Runes in order to protect something else. So here in this case, I'm not sure if you saw at the very beginning of the video, it was pretty quick, but the the Prosh player attempted to Doomblade our Hofri, and I'm guessing they didn't fully read Hofri, um, because obviously we just blocked it with Mother Runes. Now, when it comes over to the Calamax player, he is going to end up drawing, I believe, a Gilded Drake. Yeah, a Gilded Drake. And then what he's going to do is he's going to attempt to swap our Gilded Drake with Hofri. But because our spirit tokens have haste, um, we're able to do a double protect, and so that's essentially what happens. What the product player is doing is resolving his Mayhem Devil triggers at end of turn. But for me, the number of games I've had since putting in the Mother Runes and testing, uh, the Mother Runes has always been extremely effective at shutting down opponents' plans in terms of wiping our board, because the only way to truly wipe a Hofri board is to get rid of Hofri. And as long as we make it at some point a point to tutor for Mother Runes, uh, then I think we're solid in terms of our ability to stave off board wipes. That also makes our own board wipes pretty effective, though the number of board wipes I run has been reduced, just because I have found that I would rather have creature-based effects. Since we are a creature recursion deck, um, running one-time use cards like instants and sorceries are not as good in the deck, and so I've removed pretty much all the board wipes except for Blasphemous Act, which is oftentimes just a 1 mana board wipe. I know that you can also run Vanquished and the Horde, oftentimes just costing double white, but I have found that I don't really need them in a lot of cases. So for that reason, I feel like the deck is fine, relying mostly on creature abilities like Solitude. Yeah, so here's the play where he attempts to play Gilded Drake, forgets that Hofri gives Spirit Tokens haste. He says it's summoning sick. I give it Pro Blue, I say it has haste, and I point from Hofri to Mother Runes, and then he says F. So that's the double Mother of Runes is extremely difficult for people to deal with, and usually it's honestly enough to protect Hofri against multiple players. Now we did have a fourth in this game, but the fourth pretty much left early because we destroyed several of his pieces, and then he just got fed up and left. But in terms of Hofri's ability to command a table, command a board on a table, and just not be removed while doing aristocrats combos, it's pretty incredible with double mother runes as protection. And so I'm pretty happy about that switch. Another thing is that I've chopped down in the number of lands. So we used to have 36. I've gone down to 35, and I know that that may seem risky because we do have a commander that costs 5. But if I'm to be honest, we have a strong curve. Oftentimes, as early as turn 1, we are casting things, whether it's Ragavan, even Unlucky Witness. We've got Esper Sentinel. Um, we got the Mother Runes. We have things that we could be doing as early as turn 1. Deafening Silence, Land Tax. So we're not sitting there like many high-powered decks, which typically start as early as turn 2. When I say high-powered, I mean not competitive commander. I just mean optimize roughly 7 to 8. We're often starting at turn 1, whereas they're often starting at turn 2, usually with some sort of mana rock. And so we are usually able to curve out turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and almost guarantee that we'll have 5 lands just because we've been drawing cards or making treasure tokens or some combination of those. And part of the reason why I've dropped from 36 to 35 lands is because I would have turns where I've either drawn like 10 cards or essentially dug 10 cards deep, and 6 to 8 of those would be lands. And I know that there's some circumstance and perspective bias into this, but those were also games where I was cracking my fetches pretty quickly, as pretty much as soon as I got them. And so I feel like this deck doesn't necessarily need to run 36. That's something I'll be testing in the week moving forward, just to see if my conclusion is correct here. The other thing that has been added since then is filled in the third path. So I cut Knight of the White Orchid for this, and that's just because I never liked having 2 catch-up ramp creatures. So we already ramp pretty well with Solemn Loops. And I know I haven't showcased these in any videos just because until the list is solid, I'm not going to make videos going over games and replays, talking about lines and kind of showcasing just how many times we can loop Solemn Simulacrum. But I found that Loyal Warhound is enough. Now I know that Knight of the White Orchid brings in a Plains card untapped and doesn't necessarily have to be basic. However, Knight of the White Orchid has a problem, and that is it's a 2/2. The number of times that we have started off not going first, and we have either Skull Clamp or a way to get Skull Clamp, whether that's Gamble or the Stoneforge Mystic. And then we're sitting there with no other sack outlets in hand, and we're like, okay, we have a Loyal Warhound. We can play it, ramp ourselves a little bit because we're not going first. But then we don't have any way to get extra value off of it. Usually Loyal Warhound and Knight of the White Orchid, once they ramped you once as a catch-up, you're now matching the same number of lands as green players and or the player going first. And so you can't really get extra value out of them unless you can put a Skull Clamp on them and then sack them. And that's actually a tall ask for Knight of the White Orchid, because you may not necessarily be able to keep both Skull Clamp and a sack outlet, or it may be too late in the game for you to like assemble both of those pieces, or maybe essentially what I'm trying to say is you want to get value as soon as Loyal Warhound has done its job. You want to be able to Skull Clamp it, and you cannot do that with Knight of the White Orchid, uh, especially in the early turns. You really don't have time to drop a Knight, go get your Skull Clamp from the deck, and then drop another sack outlet, and then pay the mana to equip the Skull Clamp onto the Knight and then sack it without them having interacted with you in some way, whether that's killing your Skull Clamp or like removing your other sack outlet. I mean, it's just been too hard. And so even though Knight of the White Orchid is in many cases considered to be a superior card because again, doesn't have to be basic planes and brings it in potentially untapped. I found that I have had many games where I would draw a Knight of the White Orchid and just wish that it was a loyal Warhound instead. So that is that. We filled in the third path. That's been a new inclusion as well. And that's just because there have been a number of games where our Karmic Guide gets exiled or we don't have a way to get Karmic Guide back. You know, maybe we haven't found a Reveler, we haven't found our Pulse Mage Advocate. I have wanted more recursion in the deck, and so Filled in the Third Path has been a natural fit. So if we have Karmic Guide stuck, we don't have Reveler, and we don't have Pulse Mage Advocate, Felden is often searchable off of Imperial Recruiter, searchable off Gamble, and there are loops you can do with Felden and recurring other creatures. Now, obviously, we're not running anything that would untap Felden, but usually all you need is Felden recurring one creature, whether that's or creating a copy of like say Karmic Guide to bring back the original Karmic Guide, or like a copy of Revelark which we sacrifice bring back Karmic Guide, and then like Pulse Mage Advocate, or just something like that. I feel pretty comfortable with 3 recursion slots in the deck that are creature based, and I feel much more comfortable with that as opposed to just a couple. And so that is that has so far been a pretty good include. I will continue testing it throughout the week moving forward, but so far I've been pretty happy with it. Another one is Reliquary Monk. So this is just because we're not the only one that's going to be running Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines, and we need ways to destroy stuff that is not purely an ETB, and so Reliquary Monk helps do that job. But also because we were running only 5 to 6 ways to remove artifacts and enchantments, and even though our deck tends to draw a lot of cards and tutor up pretty quickly, a lot of times it's the early game where that matters. And so if an opponent sticks an early Ristic Study and we can't get rid of it, maybe we've gotten rid of it, or we'll get rid of it after we've drawn like 10 cards in the game. But if they've already gotten a lot of value out of it, or we're able to slow down the table, then the likelihood of them winning the game just from all that extra card draw is significantly high. And so I've always felt like we need more ways to remove artifacts and enchantments. And we also need ways to do that don't get hosed by an enemy Elesh Norn. Another inclusion on those lines is that we are weak to mass draw. So we can get rid of something like a Ristic Study. But if someone sticks an early, say, Consecrate Sphinx, my Sephiroth list is capable of sticking that as early as like turn 1 or turn 2 pretty consistently. We need a cheap answer to hose blue mass draw. Now I know Consecrate Sphinx is technically incremental draw. It's 2 cards for each 1 card that opponents draw. But usually if you guys Consecrate Sphinx out on like turn 1 or turn 2, unless someone started with a Path of Exile or Swords to Plowshares in hand, they're going to be drawing like 10 cards just off of that Sphinx, and your chance of winning has significantly reduced. And so we need more cheap ways to just hose blue. The other thing is we get blown out by Cyclonic Rift. So Hofri is pretty good against all board wipes, except for Farewell. Anything that's Mass Exile is really good against us. There aren't that many ways to stop Farewell, but Cyclonic Rift is a more commonly played card. And so not being able to stop that and having to rebuild after Cyclonic Rift has always been painful. And so more ways to hose Cyclonic Rift have been added to the deck. We've added the Pyroblast to complement the Red Elemental Blast and the default's Trickery. Technically, Teferi's Protection can also protect against Rift, but the idea here is that we're going to be hosing the blue cards that kind of get around our deck's main resiliency, whether that's Mass Bounce, or say someone casts like a single Sphinx's Revelation for um, a significant amount. Again, I was playing against Calamax. They have several draw cards in there, draw X cards that when they get doubled, cause them to draw significant amounts of cards, and it's very hard for us to match that in terms of card draw, even though we ourselves draw a lot of cards. Or another way to put it is Boros drawing a lot of cards is not the same thing as a blue deck drawing a lot of cards. The blue decks tend to be stronger um, when they draw a lot of cards, and so that's just it's naturally not in our favor. And I've seen that in many games, and I've also wished that I've had more ways to hose blue permanents and blue instants, and so I think the Pyroblast is a good addition here. So that's all the changes compared to last week. Again, I'll be testing all of these moving forward. I already tested them uh, in several games already, and I've been pretty happy with them. But I want to get at least 20 more games with these changes in before I'm sold that they were the correct changes. So stay tuned for next week's video where I talk more about the results of that testing as well as any other changes I've made since then. So thank you for watching and see you next week.